stop. I notice the moment before I notice the reason, the flicker in the air, the way my chest tightens like it already knows something my mouth hasn't caught up to, and it happens right after I say too much, not in volume but in shape, like I handed over something that was still warm, and I can feel my shoulders drop even before the room does, like gravity remembered me, and that's the first tell, the misread that hits the body before the story forms. Because nothing dramatic happens, no argument, no slammed door, just a soft recalibration I can't point to, and I tell myself I'm imagining it. That openness is good, that clarity is strength, that this is what grown people do, and the thought lands clean, but the feeling doesn't. It skids, and I feel smaller without anyone making me small, and I keep replaying the same harmless sentence in my head, wondering why it suddenly weighs more than it did 5 minutes ago. And this is the part I don't say out loud, the part that stays private because it sounds ugly when spoken. But in here it's just a pattern, and I'm tired enough to admit I've seen it before, not once, not twice. Enough times that the repetition starts to hum, and I notice how attraction doesn't leave loudly. It thins, it becomes polite, it starts to ask permission where it used to take space, and I watch myself lean forward to compensate, not with need, but with availability. And something about that word, availability, tastes wrong in my mouth, like metal, because it's supposed to be a gift, right? Presence, honesty, access. And yet the shift keeps showing up right there, right when I make myself easy to read, and I don't want this to be true, because if it's true, then all that advice about being open collapses into a smaller sentence I don't like. And I feel the contradiction pull at me, relief and threat at the same time, because being understood feels good, but being fully visible does something else entirely, and I can feel the silence change before the truth does. Not a dramatic silence, just a new density, a heaviness that wasn't there, and I catch myself scanning her face for confirmation, which is already a different posture than the one I had when the air was charged. And I hate that I can tell, because telling means responsibility, and responsibility means I can't pretend this is random anymore. And somewhere in the back of my head a belief starts to wobble, the belief that emotional availability equals emotional strength, and I want to protect that belief. I've defended it in conversations, I've worn it like a badge, but right now it feels thin, like a jacket in a colder room, and the room did feel different all of a sudden, not colder exactly, just less responsive, and I remember other rooms, other faces, other versions of this same moment, and the common thread isn't cruelty or manipulation, it's timing, it's polarity, it's the way mystery carries weight not because it hides, but because it moves. And I realize I didn't just share a feeling, I collapsed to distance, and distance I'm noticing is not absence, it's tension. It's the elastic that gives things snap, and when it's gone, the snap goes with it. And I feel stupid for how obvious that sounds now, but obvious things are usually invisible until they hurt, and I can hear the voice that says, no, this is cynical, this is games, this is the old script men use to avoid vulnerability, and I let that voice talk because I've used it myself, but it doesn't explain why reassurance so often lands flat, why certainty dulls instead of deepens, why saying I'm here, fully, can sometimes read as I'm done becoming. And that's the part that stings, because I'm not done, I'm just tired of holding my breath. And yet the breath is part of it, the held breath, the sense that something could happen, not because it will, but because it hasn't yet. And when I remove that by narrating myself into safety, I also narrate myself out of charge. And I see how attraction listens for movement more than comfort, how it leans toward uncertainty, not because it's cruel, but because it's alive. And I don't mean chaos, I mean edges. I mean the feeling that there's more behind the next moment, not fully mapped. And here's the stance that gets me in trouble when I say it out loud. Some of the advice about being open doesn't fail because openness is wrong. It fails because it ignores polarity, and I can already feel the disagreement forming. I can feel people tightening, because it sounds like an excuse to withhold, but that's not what I'm watching happen. I'm watching how over-explaining drains tension, how narrating every feeling removes the work of discovery, and discovery is where attraction feeds, not on secrets, on motion. And I'm watching myself confuse honesty with exposure, like leaving the door open in a storm and calling it bravery. And after the midpoint of this realization, the name finally clicks into place. Emotional availability. Not as a virtue or a flaw, but as a signal. And signals don't mean what we want them to mean. They mean what they're read as, and sometimes they read as stillness, as arrival, as the end of a chase that wasn't supposed to end yet. And I think about how evolution doesn't care about our ideals. It cares about patterns that kept things moving, and uncertainty kept attention sharp, not because people enjoy anxiety, but because attention follows what isn't finished. And I feel a sharp silence cut through that thought, the kind that makes your jaw unclench. And I realize I've been chasing reassurance from reassurance itself, which is absurd when I say it like that, but familiar when I don't. And the shame mirror hits in a small, mundane way, me typing a long message, rereading it, deleting nothing, sending it anyway, and then checking my phone too soon, pretending I'm just scrolling. And this is the moment most people never notice. The moment where the body already knows the outcome before the mind names it. And I want to say I learned from it. But learning would sound like closure, and there isn't any, just a widening pattern. And here's the unforgettable sentence that landed and didn't leave. Attraction doesn't die when you care, it dies when nothing moves. That line flips later, I know it does, because caring is movement too. But only when it's not final, and I sit with that, and I feel the emotional contradiction deepen, because I don't want to become harder, I don't want to perform distance, and yet I can't ignore how certainty flattens charge, how being fully known too early can feel like an ending, and I think about how good communication advice sounds clean on paper and messy in rooms, how telling men to just be vulnerable without context is like telling fire to be warm without mentioning oxygen, and I can feel a heavy silence settle there, not accusing, just weighty. And I exhale, not to reset, just because the thought needs air. And I remember a specific night, not dramatic, just a couch, a laugh that arrived late, a hand that didn't reach back the same way, and just when I thought it was done, it wasn't, because the pattern returned later with someone else, same timing, different face, and that's when the belief I introduced earlier finally breaks. The belief that more openness automatically equals more attraction, and I don't replace it with a new one. I just let the gap exist, a false memory gap where I can't quite remember the moment attraction turned, only that it did, and that uncertainty keeps replaying when I'm alone and scrolling, and there's a replay trigger line that sticks like a splinter. Maybe if I'd waited, maybe if I'd let it breathe, and I hate that thought because it smells like strategy, but it feels like observation, and those are different. And I'm not offering a solution, I'm just standing inside the repetition, watching how mystery triggers something. Reassurance can't, how not fully arriving keeps the future alive, and how being emotionally available isn't the same as being emotionally legible on demand. And I feel the rhythm break here, intentionally wrong, because sometimes a pause is the most honest thing, and then the room shifts again, subtly, and I realize the real threat isn't losing attraction, it's losing the tension that keeps me in motion. And if I avoid this thought, it guarantees the pattern comes back wearing a different name, and I don't resolve that. I leave it where it is, unfinished, because unfinished things are the ones that keep watching me back.